Hello, folks. Nice to see everybody.
I can't hear you. I'm talking to the person on the meeting.
I don't know.
Now I can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm just going. Yeah, I'm going to. Oh,
That's always
yay.
a good thing because Brooke is one of my fave people.
Cool.
Aw, I was just saying you're one of my favorite people. I was saying you're a dear and beloved friend. So
Yeah.
We go back a ways.
we sure do.
Brooke is actually responsible in large part for the impetus to launch the Soul Map.
Just
Really?
a little nudge. Everything else
A
was
little
you.
nudge, she says.
Holy cow, that's pretty impressive and cool. And hi, Marilyn. Yay.
Hi.
Wonderful. It's good to see folks. Yay. Well, I've got 9 o'clock here on the West Coast, noon on the East Coast. So I'll go ahead and get us started. For those who don't already know me, I'm Molly Gordon. I am thrilled to have as a guest here a very good friend and a wonderful soul, Lissa Boles. I don't even remember. I mean, I can't count how long ago, but I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Lissa was kind enough to reach out to me when she was launching the Soul Map and did a reading for me that knocked my socks off. And contrary to rumor, I'm not that easy. But more than that, I just have always felt this a soul-to-soul connection with Lissa. And she's a beautiful being. And we had a catch-up chat, I don't know, a month, 2 months, 3 months ago. Yeah. It was a while because at the time I got all excited and immediately wanted to do a hangout. And then I got into the, holy crap, I can't possibly do that now, weeds. So there's been a longer gap than I had intended between that conversation and now. But we got into a conversation about purpose. But before we go there, Lissa, I'd like to give you a chance to introduce yourself and what you're up to, if you'd like to do that.
Sure. Introduce myself. I am a seeker along with everyone else, and a deeply devoted, I'm going to say, researcher of purpose. Purpose has held me in thrall for most of my life, although I don't think I would have called it that in the early years. I didn't know what I was in thrall of. But when it started to become clear to me what it was, and I understood that I was a student of this, as well as an advocate or an ambassador of it, and a facilitator of it. When that started becoming clear, I dove in with both feet. I'm an entrepreneur and have been for the better part of 20 years. I have a deep and abiding love for the art and soul of business. I don't always like the way it is lived today. So I have a lot of fundamental disagreements about the way business is conducted today. But at its heart, it is one of the most powerful vehicles of soulful expression and potential around. And I'm a big fan when it's lived well. And I kind of hang out in the intersection between purposeful living, spiritual practice, and business, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, and a consultant, and a human being. I mean, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
That's me.
That being human thing.
That being human thing.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful.
Thanks,
That's
Mom.
beautiful. For those of you who don't know me, I'm also a coach. And at different times in my work have spent a lot of time coaching in the business space. And these Wholeness Hangouts happen every month, more or less, not always on the same day or at the same time. And the theme they're called Wholeness Hangouts because the fundamental thrust of them, they were inspired by enthusiasm for pointing at, engaging, exploring, discovering, deepening our awareness of the ways in which we are whole, connected, our access to wisdom. And most of the time, I look in a very particular direction around that because there's a body of work known, or an understanding known as the three principles. And I usually am looking in that direction, or in the context of that understanding. But like any spiritual understanding, the three principles are about perennial truths. They're not about the form that one community puts on those truths. And when Lissa and I chatted, and she started to talk about some of the questions, the way I remember it, Lissa, was that you were talking about some of the questions that were waking up in you around purpose, and some of the concerns that were waking up in you, or had been there, about how we conventionally talk about purpose, even in spiritual circles. And I thought, oh yeah. Oh yeah. This excites me. The possibility of having a deeper, more meaningful, more expansive, more connected conversation about purpose excites me. And the constrained, this is my stuff, not Lisa's stuff, she'll get to talk in a second, self-indulgent, precious, self-congratulatory way that we sometimes talk about purpose, including me, kind of pisses me off. So I said, let's do a conversation. Yeah. So that's why I thought we were here.
Yeah. So just off the top, I want to say in response to that, and to add my piece to it is,
yes.
I walked headfirst into the normative ideas, with normative ideas leading my way. If you like, so I've been enthralled with purpose, but when most of normative assumptions.
Okay, you froze there for me. I don't know if you did for others, but in case you did, would you repeat that when you...
Right. So when it became clear to me that this thing that my life is devoted to was purpose, I jumped in, because I am wont to do that. I dove in, but I dove in kind of boxed in with a whole bunch of normative assumptions I didn't even see, as most of us do. So that's yes. Kind of what you're talking about. It's like, so there's these conforming, boxed in kind of ideas and assumptions that have been around, some of them for a short time, some of them for a very long time. And some of them have been morphed, kind of updated from back then to right now, made to fit a certain current, whatever. And I didn't know that I had done that. And my journey has in many ways been about bumping into the limitations of those assumptions and going, what did I just hurt myself with here? Because I'm slamming into something.
Yeah.
And lifting them away, or doing the work of showing myself what those beliefs, assumptions are, what they had me assume about purpose without realizing I had, and then watching to see how many other people are doing it and what it's doing to them and what it's doing to their attempts and efforts and the conversations at large and the way we promise things, just a whole bunch of stuff.
So what kind of things did you notice? And first, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, but I heard you acknowledge we start innocently from this normative, what maybe I was calling the conventional understanding of purpose, and then we kind of run into some problems with it.
Well, and I love that you said we start innocently, because that was certainly my experience and what I noticed for most people. We become... when something lights us up, when we kind of land on our thing or closer to it than we ever have before, and we start to find we have language for it, we just go off in complete awe and innocence. And then, boom. As we begin a longer process that is very purpose related, like it's part of how this works. Unpacking the assumptions that contain our interaction with and our understanding of and our ability to express freely who we're supposed to be, who we're here to be, and how we're meant to do that. So I use the word normative. You said, did you say conforming?
I think I said conventional.
Conventional. Okay, yeah. Because in many respects, particularly right now, a lot of purposeful people are attempting to defy convention. It's like, you know, that song Defying Gravity from the play about the Wizard of Oz. Can't remember what it's called now.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, because convention, it's important. Some conventions have to stay, but some need to be left and built upon without anchoring us in this, you know? So it's the process of learning how we're supposed to do that. What conventions are we seeing ourselves and other people through? What conventions are we expressing through that we need to leave behind, see through, kind of separate ourselves from in terms of our identity as individuals and as members of a culture? Because boy, oh boy, purpose, more than ever I've ever seen before, the expression of purpose is really a mandate to make culture. You know, if you're fulfilling yourself, you're attempting to have a contribution to the culture, whether it's a familial culture, a professional culture, a national culture, or the human culture, because that's what I want to change the world actually means. I want a hand at helping change the culture, because what we're living in right now isn't working for many of us. In particular, it's not really working for me. And it starts with a change in the culture in here, and that's where we bump into assumptions. Because what I realized over the course of time is we're culture making, but we don't know that we're doing it. It's not a conscious process. It's not a conscious process. We're culture making all the time. And there's certain societal and cultural structures that we just fall into because of the impressions we're left with and what we've been raised with and all that stuff. And we perpetuate pieces of it or great big huge chunks of it, and we slam into how it hurts or hurts others, and we go, I want to change the world. And purpose starts to do its thing. Not that it's not always doing its thing anyway, but it moves to the fore, and it wants to be more visible, and it wants us to partner with it more consciously. But in order to do that, we have to see where we're culture making unconsciously.
So when you said we're culture making all the time, we just don't know it, reminded me of David Bohm's statement, thought creates the world, and then says, I didn't do it.
That's right. That's exactwant right.
So
unless we want to claim ownership of it, and then all of a sudden we're like, I did know what I was doing. We just want to own the outcomes that aren't fun.
Yeah, but that also begs the question of who's in charge, who's the I that thinks it knows what it's doing.
That's right. And so part of the process is learning to follow the wisdom of your own life, and it's a very different wisdom than most of us are accustomed to. And most of us, you know, it's this really interesting dynamic of leading and following at the same time and learning how to do that in tandem. So there's capacities that we need to cultivate. At the same time, we're learning how to lift away what blinkers us and what boxes us in and without knowing that that's what's happening. And in some cases, we have to hit the things that hurt to know that that's the place we're supposed to lean in. That's the place that our heart is meant to specialize in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Some years back, Andrea Lee was using the metaphor of grit in the oyster. That came to mind right there. And I know recently I had an experience last year where something that I was holding two things that I thought were in conflict in my life, wondering when I would get over one or the other of them. And suddenly I realized that what I thought one of them was a rock in my shoe. And I woke up to realize it was the grit in my oyster. It's like, this isn't the problem. in the sense of a difficulty or something to be dissolved or resolved. This is an opportunity and opening a new creation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. My beloved late husband, in our early married days, I'd lived alone for a long time. And we were in the kitchen making dinner together again in the very early days. And it was a small space. And, we kept reaching across each other and bumping into each other. And, passive aggressively, I said to him, "I'm sorry, am I in your way?" And he paused me and went, "So look at me squarely." He just looked me in the eyes with such love, I'll never forget it, and said to me, "You are not in my way, you are my way." And that's what I know to be true about grit. Grit is our way. That is a signal that the more repetitively painful it is, the deeper we're actually calling ourselves into masterful development of our ability to respond and be purposeful culture makers. So it's not like it's supposed to go away.
Yeah.
Our relationship to it needs to change, and that's really the thing.
Okay. Wow. My mind is just going, and my heart's going, whoa. And I want to make sure to do one piece of housekeeping, which is to say to everyone here, again, welcome. And please feel free to put comments or questions into the chat. And what I'd like to do, if this makes sense to Lissa, is keep talking with Lissa for maybe another 15 minutes or so to kind of build out a platform here and invite other voices into the conversation. I want to make sure that you guys know your input is not only welcome, but it's critical. So. There's so many places we could go.
I know.
So I'm just going to get quiet for a second. I'm going to throw something out, Lissa, and if it's not where you're inspired to go, we can do something different. What I'm going to throw out has to do with for lack of better words, ownership of purpose. Like, whose purpose is it? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah. Like all things with purpose, the answer is really paradoxical, and it really chaps my butt sometimes. So I'm just going to say that as a human being, but it's ours and it's not ours. It belongs to all of us, but we're the ones who have to claim it's ours for our lifetime in order for whatever is meant to be or needs to be expressed through our life to actually gain the most potent expression. Because if we don't go, okay, so this is mine to take on, then something is lost.
Yeah, it's game over.
It's game over.
If you don't show up for the game, it's game over.
That's right. And at the same time, I'm learning that it belongs to everyone. And that in some ways we've well, I'm just going to speak for myself. I began to realize that I've shown up with a sense of agreed upon obligation to my lifetime to play a role. It's my job as a person to say yes to that piece, not just for my own sake, but for everybody's sake. It's my job to do that. The reward is that I get to live a life of increasing clarity and fulfillment. So there are rewards, but it's part of this belongs to all of us. It really does belong to all of us.
Yeah, I would say maybe even bigger. It belongs to life.
That's fair. That's very fair. And so it's straddling those two.
Yeah.
And learning to be less in a tug of war about that. This is mine. That's it has become really important, particularly in the last couple of years for me personally, because I when Randy died, for those of you who don't know, my husband, my spiritual partner, my work was my darling husband, and he passed away a little over 3 years ago. And quite honestly, that first couple of years, hard. And I knew I had a sense of my loving obligation to him as a spiritual partner to keep up the work, to continue. But I also, because of my relationship to him and something like, I knew I had a sense of obligation to something larger, that there was purpose even in what I was living through, and that I really needed to get to the other side, to move through it well, before I was going to know what that was. And the first year, honestly, I had a really difficult time saying yes to that, because I was mad that I was there. I was mad that he was gone. I was mad that was part of, I was mad. Mm-hmm. And I still knew. And that knowing, as challenging as it was to live with, helped me deepen my understanding of that paradoxical thing. That makes sense.
Yes.
So much about purpose is paradoxical. It has us walking in two worlds, really. And finding a way to exist between them is a big part of this.
So I'm going to throw out one way I'm thinking about that right now, and just see if it makes sense to you. It's like, my purpose is a it's like it's a figment of my ego's imagination. On one level, I could look at it like that. It's made up. Everything that I'm experiencing is being made up in the moment. But this reminds me of something that occurred to me years ago. I imagine most people in this group are familiar with the notion that suffering is optional. And I used to chew on that because it actually pissed me off to hear that. I get it, but there's something missing. And one day I realized suffering may be optional, but it is not meaningless.
Thank you so much, Molly.
And that doesn't mean that suffering is inherently meaningful and should be, reified and honored and expanded. But I just believe there is absolutely no waste in the world.
Absolutely.
Waste as a concept doesn't make sense. So that suffering is optional or a figment of our imagination, I buy that, but that doesn't mean it's not functional. Doesn't mean that there's not some value there. So purpose as a concept is something that we have an opportunity to take on and to animate and to engage with and to play out with. And we're going to run the risk of then taking it personally, getting invested. But it seems to me like we have to be willing to run that risk. And then if we bump into a wall and find out, oh, I've made this purpose about me, and now I'm creating problems. I've become precious about my purpose. And it's not I'm not serving it, it's serving my idea of myself. But that's a risk we have to take, and then we get to wake up to it. So that's one way I'm seeing it. It's like life has some purpose. Life seems to me to be inherently creative. And as agents of life or faces of God, we are creators. And that act of creation is both personal in the sense of if I don't take it personally, I don't get out of bed. But it's not personal in that it's not actually ultimately from my little identity. So that's my version of like playing in two worlds at once. that track with what you're talking about, or are you talking about something else?
No, it does track. And identity has purpose too. It's the form of expression.
Yeah.
It's what you're describing, I think, if I've heard you well, is that it has to matter to us for us to do the work, to get up, to find a way to meet our own heartbreak or our own challenge, or engage and be in touch with experiences like passion and clarity, and you use the word not to get too precious with purpose, not to make something of it that it's not.
Yeah.
To learn how to make without making something of it it's not. So we're learning how to be makers.
Yes.
Makers of meaning, makers of, like, we are in charge of something that we're not in charge of as an individual. Learning how to be right there at the bow of the ship, realizing that we're not the only ship on the ocean, and the ship is actually a part of the ocean at the same time. But we're all needed. So yes, it's really interesting, and learning how to do that. And the reason why I get so excited about this is I've looked at this over and over and over and over, and still do. We've never attempted this as a species, not in this number and not in this way. We've never attempted.
What's this we've not attempted?
To live purposefully in so many ways together, and to have at our disposal things we have made that make the work of doing this and doing it together as public, as visible, as watchable as we can do it now. We've never, ever, in this number, with these many advantages and this many opportunities to look at it together, done this before. And at such a critical time. I mean, all you got to do is watch the headlines to see, like, we're really trying to get how to make culture. We're all over the place.
Tell me more about what you mean by making culture.
Okay. So culture making, so as soon as I hear the phrase, I want to make the world a better place, I'm like, how do you want to do that? In what way do you want to do? What does that mean? So this is connected to meaning. Making meaning in tangible forms tells us what way we want to change the world. And whenever people start going down into what that is, for them in particular, what I start to hear is that they want to revise the culture that they live in. That there's something about the way it's constructed, expressed, lived in, is not working. It's causing harm in some way, shape, or form. And what they want to do is address it in ways that update the culture, that revise the culture. So what this really is a response, a deep-seated response, no matter where you believe that comes from, to more accurately and consciously learn how to culture create as an individual, but within a collective. Within a collective, how do we talk to each other? And right now there's that conversations going on all over the place, and particularly concentrated in the United States of America, because there's divisiveness. There's, I see this and you're wrong, and I see this and they're like, how do we do that? Because if we don't do that, then bye-bye. And there's recognition like it's talked about all over the place. There's recognition that we don't necessarily have the answers completely, but there's recognition. Perhaps not on the part of everyone who's doing this, but more people, and more voices that used to be on the fringe and dismissed or disregarded or not heard at all, never mind dismissed and regarded, are being heard now. Mm-hmm. So more contributions are being made. So when I say culture making, historically that's been made at a very human level by certain people in a certain way, according to certain rules that were just taken as the given. And woe be unto them who challenged it. And that's changing.
So it seems to me that culture is essentially a consensus created of thought. It's like a collective thought form.
I'm not sure I can get totally behind the idea that it's exclusively thought. I'm not sure that word fits for me,
Mm-hmm.
but within that general idea, yes. Because sometimes what I notice is it just comes from someplace and it becomes a thought, but I get the feeling there's something that precedes that we don't really have language for. So in a way, is it by consensus? Yes, but the consensus here has to work first. So the consensus within us. So if you're at war, if there's parts of yourself that are at war and there's less consensus, or the word of the day right now is congruency. If there's not congruency amongst this and this with whatever that is, then consensus out there gets really difficult. So
I'm using thought very broadly as kind of a formless energy.
Mm-hmm.
That culture is ultimately a formless, it's an expression in the world of form of a formless perception, image, model. It's multivalent. There's lots of ways it emerges, but it emerges out of formlessness through a collective consensus of some sort. I don't know how to accurately name the mechanics of it.
Right.
And that I'm reminded years ago when John Bradshaw, who was working in the area of family recovery and family systems in substance abuse, used the image. He used to go on stage with a big mobile, wireframes of family members. And he would push the he would nudge, I'm sorry, my screen just changed suddenly. He would nudge one of the wireframes and the whole thing would shift. Not to oversimplify, but it does seem to me that when teachers like Byron Katie and other teachers throughout time point out peace begins with me, that they're pointing in a way to that mobile, to the fact that we change culture when we change.
Yep. And I think we're also, because you said something really interesting, that culture begins with the formless. And this is part of the reason why I am as enthusiastically involved in business as I am, because that is one way of learning how, in the way we're designed to, because each of us has a unique thing, to help the formless become more accurately and appropriately formed. To do it in a way that, because we're trying, that's part of learning how to make culture. How do I get in touch with this and give it shape and form more accurately so that the way it starts is the way it shows up? How do I do that? And how am I a piece of that answer in an evolutionary way? So the way that I, in this time and in this, in the swirl of what's going on right now in our collective and individual attempts, how do I make a contribution? How do I bring the formless into form in a way that has a particular impact on the kind of the way culture is expressed right now? And in North America and in the West in general, business and money making is one of the most it's one of the anchor points for Western culture. How we make money tells us so much about who we are and what's important and what isn't and what matters and where we fit. And it's like that's such a melting pot of freedom potential that it blows my mind. And it returns power to the collective. It kind of, what it aims to do when it's working well is like level the playing field, so we're not living in hierarchical forms as much. We're not living in hierarchical forms as much. We're going like this.
Yeah.
So the power is distributed, the potency is distributed, the access and creation of wealth is distributed, that everyone has a voice and everyone works on cultivating the clarity of that voice and the contribution of that voice. And it changes things. And so when I look at purpose because purpose doesn't always want to express through business. That's not necessarily an absolute, but there are some of us, from what I can tell, who are actively, that's our place of leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
That it is, in many respects, one of the pivot points in terms of the shifts in culture right now. Did I say that in a way that made sense?
I don't know.
Did it make sense to you?
I made some sense out of it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's a lot for me to reflect on in it, and yes, it could be parsed in a number of ways that not only make sense but invite me to make new sense, if that makes sense.
And I like the way that you said that, because one of the things I notice when someone is moving more accurately with purpose is that they step into the ways they sense make.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The metaphor that frequently shows up for me and that I often use in my programs is art, or even fine craft. Because you're making something out of nothing. You're making countless choices. I mean, depending on how finely you parse the decisions, there are countless choice points. So there's a great deal of purpose, deliberateness, control, and a huge steaming gob of not knowing, lack of control, choices that go off. And it's both. You don't make art if you just sit and stare at the paper.
Right.
And I remember actually an improv class in which we were experimenting in creating a conversation together without knowing what we were going to say and not even knowing how we were going to end the sentence or the words we were saying. And I failed at that exercise because I went too far into the just see what shows up space, and I didn't give my partner anything to work with. So you got to put a gesture on the paper. You got to mark on the wall. You have to move in the dance.
Yep.
And then the dance moves you. And it's both.
That's right. We are both the music and the dancer.
Yeah.
Yep. And failure in that particular sense of, it is and it isn't. That's why I think the conversation about failure is so important. And when you're looking at it with purpose, it changes, because failure isn't a failure so much as okay, so when I get here, it's like, that didn't really work. What was missing?
Yeah.
What didn't I know? What couldn't I see? Well, let me try that again. And then we take what we learn, go back to the beginning and try it again, adding the insight, adding the experience, so that what we thought of as failure becomes a building block of the next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Karen asks if we could speak more to our take on how clarity and identity or business offering is a spiritual act.
Oh.
And go ahead. And I also wanted to invite Karen if she wanted to come on to say more about it. I've muted everyone just to cut down background noise, but please feel free to unmute yourself in order to participate.
Yeah, I would love to hear Karen's thoughts about that too, because I'm curious about why she's asking.
Yeah.
I suspect she sees something, and I'd really love to know what it is she sees.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it exclusively a spiritual act? I'm not sure. I think everything, when you get right down to it, everything is a spiritual act, but it's on the continuum of formlessness and formation. So it's a continuum, and where on that continuum decides what you're doing, how you're doing it, and to some degrees your particular application.
And how conscious you are.
And how conscious you are.
Yeah.
I think it's all a spiritual activity. How on your take on clarity and identity? So identity is really interesting. I think we need it. I think it's like a container but I think that the container morphs and shifts and changes. There's fundamentals to it that I'll always seem to stay in place from what I can tell, but it morphs and changes. So for example, in my own experience, my sense of identity was one thing before my husband died, and after he died, it was different and is still taking a new shape and form. There's pieces of it that have come with me, but there's newness. How important is clarity in identity? I think it's again, a very paradoxical thing. It's necessary in as far as you can see with clarity, and clarity is an ever-evolving thing you have to be engaged in repetitively. It's like the ongoing conversation with a beloved, where you're always learning new things. You know, the moment you think you know everything, you're in trouble. So it's the same idea. You're always getting to know yourself. There's a core, but it takes new shapes depending on the focus of your life and the situation you're encountering and what's going on in the field and all kinds of things. In terms of business offering, what I've witnessed is, again, it's critical and it's an evolving thing. So, which is a blessing, provided that one of the conforming ideas in your mind is not the idea that there's a once perfect expression and that's it, you're done, which most of us hold, and myself included, but that this actually allows you to discover in an ongoing way, in conjunction with your own evolution and with the way you're called to meet and serve. There's a progression, there's a growth track, and every spot along the growth track and the clarity about it, the developing and ongoing clarity about it, actually says, I can offer this right now. And then you move and things shift and change and you become clear about that. I can offer this now. And there'll be traces of this, more often than not, this, in this, but this will be different. It's often an evolution of.
Yeah. You know, when we first talked about purpose, Lissa, and I think this was even one of the terms that occurred to me, and I don't remember if I did use it when I wrote the page for this hangout, was purpose can be a red herring that takes us off our purpose, our concept of purpose. And I find the same is true of concepts of clarity, and for me, concepts of what a spiritual act is. I don't know how to answer that question or explore it without knowing what it means
to Corinne.
To Corinne, for it to be a spiritual act. And I see that Laura has her hand up. So Laura, I would love for you,
Laura, you're here,
to step in. And
Laura's my creative partner. So
Karen, you're also welcome to step in whenever you wish. So Laura, go for it.
Great. Well, the thing that I was thinking about in terms of Corinne's question, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Karen or Corinne, whatever it is. Is that, you know, there's a level of, when I think about clarity of identity and acts in business, and whether they're spiritual or not, or, you know, to the degree to which it's a spiritual act, I'm thinking about, Molly, I think you've exemplified a level of identity that allows you to be very conscious of choices that you're making. So you made a very clear distinction between your ego identity or your personality identity, and it's obvious that you identify yourself as something that's bigger than that, or something that's different than just that. And I think that for a lot of us in the world, I don't necessarily mean a lot of us in this conversation, but a lot of us in this world haven't gotten beyond the identification with the you know, the personality identity.
Yes.
Which makes it really hard to choose something that would be more, as Lissa was saying, more congruent with our purpose and with, you know, a spiritual intention.
Yeah.
And I think that the degree to which we are conscious of ourselves as more than that kind of reactive identity, the more we're able to make the choices in our business that really serves our purpose and really serves the people that we're here to serve, with the purity of heart, rather than that kind of reactiveness that we often get triggered into.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Lisa, you keep pointing to, or at least I keep hearing, the importance of being willing to take form as an identity, because otherwise we don't get out of bed, we don't make things, we don't feed hungry children, we don't create, and since we're here, I have to assume that something cares about that happening. Calling it a something and saying it cares is, kind of goofy, because who knows what this phenomenon that's so much vaster than we are is and how to talk about it. But it's happening. And since it's happening, I have to assume that it's a good thing. And there's this, I'm constantly in a dance these days between it's like every day is an invitation to be willing to step into an ego, make it about me, and get it all wrong spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I don't even know if this is true, but I'm going to finish the sentence. And this is life in my mind anymore. At the beginning of a sentence, I can't tell if the end of it will be true. But it's like the most spiritual thing I can do now is be willing to mess it up spiritually and not use that to let myself off the hook for waking up if and when I can.
And using those occasions of screw up in the same way as we described with your experience with improvisation.
Yes.
The screw up is information. Like, to take for granted that because we're trying to learn how to be in particular ways.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the tasting of the porridge. Oh, that's too hot. Ooh, so let me try this bowl. Oh, that's too cold. Yeah. Oh, and then we got to go, oh, that's just right. But we have to find out what our right is through experience.
Yeah.
And using those experiences as opportunity to ask new questions and engage with more awareness and consciousness, while staying fluid between formlessness and form, realizing that what we're attempting to do is bring formlessness, the purity of that, into form. How do I do that? No, that's too cold. No, and even here, this is form. Too hot, too cold, too much of this, too much of that, but it's here for a reason. What's that reason? What am I supposed to do with it? What's it supposed to taste like? So you're right. It's that fluid, engaged, not holding on, but throwing yourself right into it. And I'm the first one. I don't like making mistakes. It still makes me feel crappy about myself, but I'm learning that mistakes or the lack of success is actually as successful as quote unquote success is, because it's a signpost if I engage with it that way. It actually wants to help me see what I'm doing and get clues about how to do it more accurately.
Exactly.
I'm just thrilled that you said what you did.
And I don't know how to pronounce your name, OGE, but you made what I thought was a wonderful comment in the chat that I want to acknowledge, and to invite you to join in on audio if you like. But direct everybody's attention to that there are clues to our purpose or bigger identity. And a lot of times, and oh my God, do I do this all the time, we look for the magical. And this is why I'm a little allergic to the idea of what makes this a spiritual act. Because so often in my own life, when I've asked that, I've been looking, what makes this magical, special? What makes me better? And even as I say that now, I feel like it's important to realize the innocence and good intention of that. I love that we care enough to do that, and I think we're off track when we do that, but how do we know we're off track until we go off track and find another way?
Yep.
But this goes also to clarity. So often as a coach, I've seen over the years in clients and in myself, when we're looking for clarity, a client comes and says, just really need clarity. And it's like there are 10,000 bits of clarity going on in this person's life. And they are hyper-focused on one place where they think they're unclear and don't see that the only lack of clarity is that they've made that the question. And that they think that the answer is going to have a certain shape or flavor or vibe or characteristic. And so it's like, I once realized we can't order clarity or insight the way we order a pizza. If you really want new thought, if you really want an insight, if you really want to see clearly, you have to be willing to let go of what you've already thought and seen and expected. And it often shows up in really mundane, simple ways.
I also have come to see that sometimes it's about the approach of expectation. So I don't know that expectation necessarily needs to go away, but we often look at ourselves with certainty inside negative expectation. Like we think we know what we're seeing in a negative fashion, which clouds our ability to see it honestly.
Yes.
And the other thing is, so with negative expectation, or to see something as if it's discrete and not part of something. And that precludes our ability to see, like you said, there's 10,000 pieces of clarity, but hyper-focus right here. Well, okay, so if we soft focus this and we allow the other bits and pieces that are relevant to this to start to come into focus, what do they say about this? Like there's a dance within the activity of gaining clarity that we haven't really understood before. I'm watching people unpack the process of gaining clarity that I've never even heard of. I've never read about, because we're learning how we function right now. As we engage these questions, as we attempt to create form, as we attempt to respond to our own deep desire to make a difference, we're learning how we be. We have to witness our own process to see there is one. And there's universalities amongst us, and then there's specific, particular ways we do it. And we have to learn what that is. We have to engage with ourselves with a kind of reverent curiosity that sees everything and nothing as magical, everything and nothing as special. In the mundane, there is extraordinariness, but we have to look at it differently and look at ourselves differently. And really, because that's one of the biggest things I've seen, we all have a process for bringing the formless into form. And witnessing that process helps us understand who we are and why we are the way we are. So one of the things that used to make me crazy about myself, I'm like, oh my God, that's what helps me understand and do that? Oh, okay. All right then. And all of a sudden my relationship to that piece and its relationship to everything else changes.
Yeah.
So there's a process to gaining clarity that we're beginning to see individually and collectively, I think, potentially for the very first time, or in larger ways than we ever have before, and been able to communicate to ourselves clearly, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, one of the places we have not had time to go, but that I just feel like I need to at least bookmark in this conversation is the emergence of tools for collective connection, communication, thinking, organizing. You know, the internet, Zoom. I mean, holy crap.
Holy crap, indeed.
I remember years ago at an integral consciousness conference in Boulder, having dinner with a group of people, and throughout that whole week actually having multiple experiences when it felt like my brain was the hive brain. Like, what's coming out of my mouth? Who put that in there? It was wild. And now we have, through technology, vehicles and media through which we can network and connect with each other to express, create, collaborate, communicate, that are just mind-blowing and that are game changers in terms of collective meaning making.
And that can spark our individual meaning making so that we're evolving as individuals within the collective and evolving the collective. Like, it's going like this, it's overlapping. There's a virtuous cycle if you can engage with it that way, that sparks the individual and the collective in this kind of heartbeat way is really intriguing. And why I'm watching and participating in collectives, like, I don't like the use of the word mastermind because it tends to be this, and it's so much more than that. So people are talking about holding space, creating containers. And when a space is held and more understanding of what that is and why it's important, then the collective, the individual and collective, that thing that happens, it goes to that phrase from the Bible, where two or more are gathered in my name. So it can happen through technology, but it actually is a spiritual space, a substantial space in which something more than the sum of the parts is present and active and communicating and revealing itself. And then it's the engagement with that by individuals and the collective in this space and how the space is held that radically changes things, moves it along faster, helps things become more clear. And I'm watching that show up more effectively all over the place. All over the place. And when people are, and I'm watching this too, people leaning in and asking questions about, so what is the creation of space? How does that happen? A lot of us are doing it with unconscious competence because it's a gift we have. And we're showing up and participating in it, but we don't necessarily understand what it is we're doing. And we're starting to realize that we do need to. What am I up to here that is helping this happen? What is it I'm up to? Can I see it? Without getting too precious about it?
Yeah, without reducing it to
exactly.
Tool technique, without reducing it to the forms, expressing the forms.
That's right.
As starting places.
That's exactly right. And that's where those edges are. You don't want to take too much ownership. You don't want to get too precious. You don't want to hold on too tight, but you have to be on the edge of those things in order to participate properly. That's where you need to see your own process. What's going on here? Am I doing it the way you are? Is there universalities to it that we need to learn about together? And is there distinctness that I'm doing that is particular to me and will be particularly useful to a select group of people who need whatever that piece is? And so we're learning how to partner with this and be engaged in the process in the way we're meant to and in the ways we all need to. Like, I'm watching, you're right, technology is changing things, but we also have to, so I see a lot of this too. I get excited about technology for the very same reasons you just said. And a lot of us don't realize that they are tools at our disposal, enabling tools. We kind of end up getting run by them. And we have to learn how not to be run by them. Not to be subsumed by whatever triggers, to manage our triggers, to engage with them like grit rather than, technology runs my life.
Yeah.
OJ said, OJ, I don't know that I'm saying that right either. And please forgive me if oftentimes now when I'm confused, that in itself is clarity. Absolutely. It tells me there's an area that's so important to me. I desire you explore it more. Confusion can be clarity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. It's a signpost.
Yeah.
It's a signpost. You're right. Look more deeply here. Yes. Yeah. Your life's trying to show you something. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute. Ow. So we have to do this again.
Oh, anytime, my friend. I love talking to you. I do. And I love this conversation. I am devoted to this conversation.
And while we haven't heard audibly from a lot of you, I love the feeling I'm getting. What's been shared in the comments, which I will make sure are also available when I post the replay. I'm very grateful for all of you. Lissa, how can people find you? Most of the people here probably know how, but there'll be people watching this who don't.
Right. Well, you can find me on Facebook. So if social media platform is your thing, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Lissa, Lissa Boles. If you're you got an inkling that talking or connecting with me specific to the work that I do is of interest to you above and beyond just connecting, then thesoulmap.com or facebook.com/thesoulmap, where I really do look at all of these things through the lens of purpose, and particular through profession or business.
Yeah.
So those are the two places.
And evolution and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you, folks. The recording, the video will be posted on the page where you click to link to join. There will also be an audio that you can download, and I will make sure that the comments are on that page as well. Thank you all so much. And I think there's a comment form on that page, so we can just continue the discussion there as well. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Lissa, I love you.
I love
Bye.
you too, Molly. Bye.